You're listening to Filmmaking Giants. This is a show about the people who changed the language of cinema, not only by inventing new techniques, but by changing what films feel like from the inside. And today's filmmaker is not someone who shouts her importance. She doesn't build her reputation on speeches, on plot mechanics, on tidy moral statements, or on stories that close like a locked door at the end. Instead, she makes films that remain open in the body. Films you don't just remember, you carry. Claire Denis is one of the rare directors whose work teaches you that cinema isn't only what you see, it's what you sense. It's the pressure of a room. It's the heat of skin. It's the space between two people who can't say what matters, so they express it with distance, with touch, with refusal. Claire Denis is often called an elliptical filmmaker, and that's true, but it can be misunderstood. Elliptical doesn't mean vague. It doesn't mean incomplete. It means she chooses where to place the camera and where to cut in a way that respects the messiness of lived experience, where most of what shapes a life happens offstage, in memory, in silence, in the things you don't confess to yourself. In her work, the ellipse isn't a gap in the story. It is the story. She is not interested in explaining a character's motives like a therapist summarizing a case. She's interested in the way motives leak out through behavior, the way a hand stays on someone's shoulder one beat too long, the way a gaze won't land where it should, the way two people can share a space and still live in separate worlds. To understand Denis, you have to understand that she is a filmmaker of proximity. Her camera does not stand at a polite distance. It leans in. It attends to the surface of things. Skin, fabric, sweat, hair, breath. Not because she's trying to make everything sensual, but because she understands that human life is physical first. History is physical. Power is physical. Trauma is physical. Desire is physical. A political system does not only exist in laws. It exists in bodies. Who is allowed to move? Who is watched? Who is touched? Who is avoided? Who is required to smile? Who is required to serve? Denis was born in 1946 in Paris, but her early years unfolded largely in colonial Africa, where her father worked as a civil servant. That biographical fact matters not as trivia, but as a foundation for how she sees. To grow up in colonial environments is to grow up inside an invisible machine of hierarchy, one that presents itself as normal, as order, as the way things are, while quietly shaping every interaction. Who has authority? Who belongs? Who is considered a guest in their own land? Who is expected to perform politeness? Who is expected to disappear? And they remain present in her films not as slogans but as atmosphere. You feel them in the way people occupy space. You feel them in the way a room can be calm and still oppressive. Her first feature, Chocolat, is often described as an autobiographical reflection on colonial childhood. But what's striking about it is how restrained it is. Denis does not stage grand confrontations to prove a point. She does not force characters into speeches that announce the theme. Instead, she shows colonialism the way it actually persists, in small humiliations, in unequal intimacies, in the social choreography of who stands where and who is served by whom. Chocolat understands something many films about colonialism miss. The most damaging aspect is not only overt violence. It's the daily insistence that inequality is natural. It's the normalization of imbalance. It's the way affection can be entangled with ownership. It's the way closeness can be poisoned by a system that makes closeness impossible on equal terms. This is why Denis is not a message filmmaker. She is a filmmaker of embedded politics. In her world, politics is not a topic. It is a condition. It is the air people breathe, even when they pretend not to notice. Denis trained at IDHEC, one of France's major film schools, and she worked as an assistant director for a range of filmmakers, including Wim Wenders and Jim Jarmusch. You can feel traces of both influences, but she is not a derivative artist. From Wenders, you can sense an attention to place, to the emotional weight of landscapes and cities. From Jarmusch, perhaps, a confidence in mood and rhythm, a willingness to let a scene exist without hammering it into plot. But Denis' voice is distinct because she approaches cinema less as a narrative machine, and more as a way of observing how people live in their bodies. One of the defining partnerships of her career is with cinematographer Agnès Godard. Together they developed a visual language that feels tactile, an image-making approach that doesn't treat bodies as objects to be displayed, but as sites of meaning. Godard's camera under Denis' direction is not interested in mastery. It doesn't dominate. It doesn't announce itself with flashy movements. It watches. It stays close. It allows light to fall on skin in a way that feels like contact rather than spectacle. Denis and Godard often frame parts of bodies rather than whole bodies: hands, shoulders, necks, backs, torsos, creating the sense that identity is not only expressed through faces and dialogue. Identity is in posture, in movement, in fatigue, in hunger. And this is where Denis becomes radical. She builds character through physicality. A Denis character is not explained, they are revealed in fragments. You learn who they are the way you learn who someone is in real life, through patterns, through behaviors, through what they repeatedly do when they think no one is watching. This method reaches one of its most celebrated expressions in Beau Travail. The film is loosely inspired by Melville's Billy Budd, but Denis is not adapting the plot so much as translating a moral structure into cinema's physical language. The setting is the French Foreign Legion in Djibouti. On paper, that could easily become a conventional drama about military discipline or colonial occupation. But Denis makes something stranger and more profound. A film about masculinity as choreography, about desire as repression, about jealousy as a kind of quiet disease. In Beau Travail, the legionnaires train. They run, they do drills, they move in unison. Their bodies are sculpted by routine. The film watches these movements with an intensity that can feel almost hypnotic. And gradually you realize what you are watching: a system that turns bodies into instruments and then punishes bodies for having feelings. The genius of Denis here is that she makes the training sequences do narrative work. She doesn't need constant dialogue to tell you who has power. You see it in who commands and who obeys. You see it in how someone watches another man's body. Admiration, envy, desire, resentment, without a single confession being spoken. You see it in the way the landscape frames the men. Foreign land, foreign heat, foreign language around them. And inside that, a rigid ritual that allows them to feel control. The Foreign Legion setting matters because it is inherently about displacement, men from elsewhere enforcing order elsewhere. And Denis understands that such institutions are haunted. They carry histories, even when they refuse to name them. Colonialism in Beau Travail is not delivered as commentary, it is present in the image. A European military force occupying African space, performing rituals of control, turning the environment into a stage for their own identity crises. The landscape is not a neutral background, it is a witness. And this is something Denis does repeatedly. She makes space moral. A room is not just a room. A landscape is not just scenery. A ship, a prison, a city street, these are all systems of force, shaping what is possible for a body inside them. If Denis's films were only about mood, they would be easy to dismiss as artsy. But they aren't. They are about the violence of systems, and how that violence is often expressed through intimacy, through the private, through what happens between people who care for each other but cannot escape the structures that shape their care. Claire Denis's cinema becomes clearer once you notice how often her scenes are built around what cannot be said. Not won't be said as in a coy mystery. Cannot be said because the characters either don't have the language for it, or because the truth would destroy the life they are trying to maintain, or because the truth is entangled with shame. Denis is fascinated by the way people protect themselves with silence. She films that protection as something physical. The tightening of a face, the small turn of a shoulder, the pause before a word that never comes. This is why her films can feel at first like they're withholding information you need. But that sensation is part of her intention. Denis is asking you to experience the same uncertainty that her characters live with. In real life, you rarely receive neat exposition. You infer, you sense, you misread, you correct. Denis makes ambiguity not a gimmick, but a moral position. The refusal to simplify human beings into clean explanations. And it's not only personal silence she films, it's historical silence. A great deal of Denis's work is about colonial memory and its afterlife. But she approaches this theme in a way that refuses the usual structure of the past revealed, the truth spoken, the lesson learned. Colonial history in Denis is not an archive you open and close. It is a lived residue. It shapes relationships even when no one speaks of it. It shapes who can desire whom. It shapes who is trusted. It shapes who is seen as fully human. In her films, the past is carried in the body, like a scar that aches in certain weather. There is also a profound interest in the line between intimacy and domination. Denis is acutely aware that intimacy can be unequal, that closeness can be coercive, that love can be tangled with ownership, that the most devastating violence is sometimes enacted not through obvious brutality, but through a system that decides who can be vulnerable and who must remain guarded. Her characters often navigate relationships where tenderness and danger coexist, and Denis refuses to sanitize that coexistence. This refusal is one reason her films can be unsettling even when nothing bad appears to happen. You sense that a relationship is wrong before you can name why. Denis is not staging a twist, she is staging recognition. If you want one of the clearest demonstrations of her method, consider how she treats time. A Denis film doesn't always move forward in a clean line. It doesn't always signal when a scene is important. It doesn't always anchor you with narrative markers. Instead, scenes arrive like memory arrives, vivid, partial, sometimes out of order, sometimes repeating a feeling rather than a fact. This is why people use the word elliptical. Denis cuts away from the obvious. She enters late and leaves early. She gives you the emotional center and trusts you to find your way. But she doesn't do this because she's indifferent to story. She does it because she believes story is only one layer of reality. Beneath story, there is sensation. Beneath sensation, there is history. Beneath history, there is the unconscious. Those urges and fears we do not control, but which control us. This is where her films can become truly uncomfortable. Denis does not protect the viewer from the fact that desire can be violent. That brings us to Trouble Every Day, one of her most debated films. It is often filed under horror, and it has elements that fit: violence, blood, dread. But the horror label can be misleading, because it suggests the film's main purpose is to scare. Denis is doing something different. She is exploring desire as appetite, intimacy as consumption, sexuality as a force that can turn predatory. What makes Trouble Every Day so disturbing is not simply what happens. It's how close Denis keeps you. Her camera does not look away quickly. It refuses the comfort of distance. Violence is staged with editing that shields the viewer. Cuts that reduce the physicality, music that guides your response, pacing that allows escape. Denis does not offer that escape. She insists on proximity. This is not sadism, it's interrogation. Denis is asking, what do we mean when we say desire is natural? What do we mean when we romanticize hunger, emotional hunger, sexual hunger, hunger for closeness, without admitting that hunger can destroy? The film is not telling you that desire is evil. It's telling you that desire is not always safe, that love is not always clean, that intimacy is not always innocent. This theme is present in her gentler films too, just less explicitly. Denis is a filmmaker who understands that bodies are not purely symbolic. Bodies have needs. Bodies have impulses. Bodies can betray ideals. And this is one reason she is so important in the context of cinema's history. She insists on the body as a site of meaning, not as a decorative object. She is not interested in the body as spectacle for an audience to consume. She is interested in the body as the place where power, history, desire, and fear become real. Now, a key component in making this work is her approach to performance. Denis does not direct performances toward exposition. She often asks actors to play what they cannot say. She gives them space to be opaque. In more conventional cinema, opacity is treated as a problem to fix. Add a line, clarify a motive, provide a backstory. Denis treats opacity as a truth. People are opaque, even to themselves, especially to themselves. This is why Denis often works repeatedly with the same actors, because she needs performers comfortable with understatement and ambiguity. Performers who can hold internal tension without discharging it in speeches. Denis uses music differently. Her music is weather. It doesn't dictate your reaction. It surrounds the scene, amplifies its emotional temperature, sometimes contradicts it, sometimes deepens it. Like memory, the music in Denis can return, echo, and haunt. A filmmaker studying Denis should pay close attention to this. She treats sound and music as part of the film's physical texture. Her films are not only seen, they are heard and felt. Because she expanded what cinema could be without turning it into abstraction. She proved that you can build meaning through sensation and still be deeply political. She proved that you can treat bodies with seriousness and avoid exploitation. She proved that ambiguity can be an ethical stance rather than an intellectual trick. And perhaps most importantly, she proved that films can be honest about the mess of intimacy, how love and power and desire can tangle and still remain humane. To finish understanding Claire Denis, you have to stop trying to watch her films the way you watch most films. Most films invite you to lean on comprehension. They hand you a sequence of causes and effects. They reward you for tracking information. And they resolve with some form of closure. Sometimes happy, sometimes tragic, but usually shaped like an ending you can hold. Denis doesn't deny story, but she refuses to let story be the only way meaning arrives. She asks you to watch with your whole body, to let the film work on you before you translate it into language. That request can feel difficult in a culture trained to demand explanation. But once you accept her premise, Denis becomes one of the clearest filmmakers you can encounter. Not clear in a plot sense, but clear in a human sense. She sees how people are built from contradictions. She sees how we carry our pasts without knowing how to name them. She sees how power is not only an institution out there, but an instinct inside the room. And she sees that intimacy, which we like to romanticize, is often the place where these forces become most tangible. Denis' greatest subject is the invisible force field between people. That force field is made of memory, desire, fear, class, race, history, and unspoken rules. In many films, those forces are made visible by turning them into events. Someone confesses, someone fights, someone gets punished, someone gets redeemed. Denis often does the opposite. She shows you the force field itself, before it becomes an event. She films the charge that exists in a look, the dread that exists in a pause, the longing that exists in repetition. And because she focuses on the charge rather than the event, her films can feel unusually honest. Real life is mostly charge. Events are rare. We live in anticipation, regret, denial, and desire, far more than we live in catharsis. This is why Denis' endings often feel like a door left ajar. She is not refusing closure to be difficult. She is refusing closure because closure is often a lie. Trauma does not end neatly. Colonial history does not end because someone speaks about it once. Desire does not become safe because a relationship becomes official. Power does not dissolve because a character understands it. Denis is, at her core, an anti-fantasy filmmaker. But she is not a cold filmmaker. That tenderness is one of the most overlooked aspects of her cinema. People often talk about Denis as if she is only severity and ambiguity. But she is also capable of profound empathy. She gives her characters dignity, even when they do terrible things. She does not reduce anyone to an emblem. She understands that people do not behave badly because they are evil, in a simple sense. They behave badly because they are in pain, because they are trapped, because they are shaped by environments they did not choose. What makes her feel so original is the way she places that empathy in the body. A Denis film might show a character making choices that look self-destructive, and instead of cutting to a dramatic explanation, she shows the character's fatigue, the way they walk, the way they touch a wall, the way they look away, the way they try to be calm while something inside them trembles. Denis trusts the actor's physicality to carry the inner life. She trusts cinema's oldest power, the ability to show you a person being a person. And yet her work is also intensely formal. Denis may appear loose because she is elliptical, but her films are carefully structured through rhythm. She is a director who thinks like a musician. Scenes don't only follow each other because of plot. They follow each other because of tone, because of emotional logic, because of echo. One scene might end on a sound that returns in another scene. A movement might be mirrored later in a different context. A phrase might return, not to clarify, but to haunt. This is not random. It is motif. And motif is how Denis creates coherence without exposition. Her collaboration with Agnès Godard is essential to this coherence, because the camera style itself becomes part of the film's rhythm. Denis and Godard often place the camera at a distance that feels intimate, not necessarily physically close, but emotionally close. Even wide shots can feel like proximity because of how they emphasize the relationship between body and space. The lens choice, the texture of light, the way skin looks under a certain glare, the way shadows gather in corners, these are not aesthetic decorations. They are narrative elements. They tell you what kind of world this is, and what kind of pressure it applies to people. If you're a filmmaker trying to learn from Denis, the craft lessons are demanding but concrete. First, treat bodies as narrative. Instead of writing scenes where characters explain themselves, ask what the body would do if the character cannot speak their truth. How would they stand? What would they avoid? What would they repeat? What would they do when they are alone? Second, trust the viewer to infer. Denis refuses to spoon-feed, but she is not careless. She plants information in behavior, in objects, in space. The viewer can piece it together, but only if the film respects the viewer's intelligence. Denis does. Third, build scenes around tension rather than information. The most powerful scenes are not always the ones where something happens. They are the ones where something is about to happen, or where something already happened and people are trying to survive the aftermath. Fourth, use sound as texture, not just utility. Denis understands that sound is physical. A room has a sound. A relationship has a sound. Silence is not empty. Silence is charged. Fifth, accept that politics is not only content. Who is framed as central and who is peripheral? Whose body is shown with dignity and whose is shown as disposable? Who gets to be seen as complicated? Who is allowed tenderness? In Denis, political meaning emerges not from speeches, but from cinematic choices. This last point is part of why Denis has become so influential, even when her influence is invisible. You see her impact in films that treat bodies with seriousness, in contemporary cinema that values mood and gesture, in filmmakers who build meaning through texture rather than explanation. But Denis remains distinct because she avoids turning her style into a brand. She is not making Denis-like films as a signature move. She is making films that follow her instincts about what human life actually is: fragmented, embodied, haunted, and rarely resolved. And now we can return, one last time, to Beau Travail, because it contains a scene that feels like a thesis statement about Denis as an artist. Toward the end, the film shifts into something that feels almost unreal, not because it becomes fantasy, but because it becomes pure expression. It is one of the most celebrated endings in modern cinema precisely because it refuses explanation and instead gives you a body releasing something it has held for too long. It is not plot, it is release. It is the body finally speaking in the only language it can. That's Denis, the body speaking. And this is the deepest reason her work can be unsettling. She will not let you hide in analysis. She will not let you keep everything at a safe distance. She will bring you close enough that you have to feel the weight of history and desire, not as concepts, but as lived forces. Claire Denis is a giant because she expanded the cinematic language of intimacy and politics. She made films where colonial history is not a lecture, but an atmosphere, where desire is not romanticized into safety, where the viewer is not guided by explanation, but invited into a state of sensation. And because of that, her films remain, quietly, stubbornly, alive in the viewer long after the screen goes dark. You've been listening to Filmmaking Giants. Today we explored Claire Denis, intimacy, bodies, and colonial history, and a film language built from proximity, rhythm, ellipsis, and the politics embedded in physical life. Next, we'll turn to Wong Kar-wai, the poet of longing, whose cinema transforms repetition, color, music, and gesture into a meditation on time. The love that arrives too late, the future that slips away, the feeling of living beside your own life.